The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and hurried mornings. Vanessa Grant stood at the counter, card in hand, waiting for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, the screen flashed red. "Declined again, ma'am. Do you have another card?" The cashier's tone sharpened with each word, loud enough for the entire line behind her to hear. Vanessa remained still. At 35, she had mastered the art of controlled silence. This was not embarrassment. It was something colder, sharper, the kind of anger that settled deep but burned slow. Behind her, someone let out an impatient sigh. Then came a voice she recognized. Instantly, smooth, patronizing, and utterly unforgettable. "Hey, cashier, just put her coffee on my tab." She turned. There he stood, Bradley Whitmore. Perfectly styled silver hair, tailored navy suit, and that trademark smug smile. The same man who fired her in front of an entire boardroom 6 months ago. Without a flicker of recognition, Bradley lifted his Apple Watch to the reader. The payment approved instantly. Vanessa took the cup, nodded politely, and walked out. Her fingers tightened around the coffee sleeve as a bitter smile formed. He had no idea who she was now, and absolutely no clue that this small, forgettable moment would become the most expensive $5.80 of his entire life. 6 months earlier, Vanessa Grant had stood at the front of Whitmore Industries' executive boardroom, holding the remote for the projector with steady hands. Behind her, a giant screen displayed slide after slide of carefully analyzed market data, graphs, trends, revenue forecasts. She had spent countless sleepless nights building this presentation. 42 slides of strategic brilliance designed to pull Whitmore Industries back from the edge of bankruptcy. "Gentlemen," Vanessa began, adjusting her glasses, "our projections show that with the right course corrections, not only can Whitmore survive this downturn, but it can double its profit margin within 18 months. For a few seconds, the room stayed silent. Then came the sound she dreaded. Bradley Whitmore casually clicking his $15,000 Mont Blanc pen, spinning it between his fingers like a toy. Seated at the head of the table, Bradley wore his usual air of lazy entitlement. The son of a man who had built this company from the ground up, Bradley had inherited both the CEO title and a complete disregard for anyone he deemed beneath him. "Interesting perspective, Vanessa," he finally said, barely glancing at the slides. "But do you not think you might be overestimating our ability to change? This company has traditions, a legacy that goes back 4 generations." Vanessa knew exactly what that meant. Traditions, legacy, words he used when he really meant something else. "We do not want people like you making important decisions here." But she kept going. For 2 hours, she laid out irrefutable figures, consumer behavior trends, operational inefficiencies, and targeted growth opportunities that no one else on the executive team had managed to identify. The applause at the end was polite. Lukewarm. Bradley gave her that same condescending smile she had grown used to over the years. "Thank you, Vanessa. We will consider your suggestions." She knew then that they would not. 3 weeks later, the company held a press conference. Bradley Whitmore stood in front of cameras and investors, unveiling what he called a revolutionary new strategy to save Whitmore Industries. Every word he spoke was pulled directly from Vanessa's proposal, slide by slide, metric by metric. Even the color scheme remained the same. The financial media hailed him as a visionary leader. Stock prices soared. Investors poured in millions. Vanessa did not receive a single word of credit. Instead, 2 days after the press conference, she was called into Bradley's corner office. The room smelled like leather and expensive scotch. Bradley leaned back in his Italian leather chair, giving her that same false look of sympathy. "Vanessa, you are very intense," he said, as if that was a character flaw. "Maybe it is time for you to explore opportunities better suited to your profile. Nonprofits, community initiatives, something where your passion can really shine." Her hands trembled, but she kept her expression calm. "So you are firing me?" Bradley shrugged. "It is more of a restructuring. You know how these things go." He stood, reaching across his desk to shake her hand as though they were parting on good terms. Vanessa ignored the gesture. She walked out of that office with her head high, but inside she felt the crack forming, deep and sharp. It was not just the theft. It was not just the public humiliation. It was the message behind it all. "You are talented enough for me to steal from, but not worthy enough to stand beside me." That day, as she packed her things into a cardboard box, Vanessa made a silent promise to herself. This would not be the end of her story. Not by a long shot. In the months following her dismissal, Vanessa Grant disappeared from Manhattan's corporate radar. While Bradley Whitmore soaked in media praise for his visionary leadership, Vanessa was working in silence, turning every insult, every stolen idea, every fake smile into fuel. Her tiny, one-bedroom apartment became a war room. The walls were covered with market research, investor reports, and employee directories at midnight. While most of the city slept, Vanessa drafted business plans by the glow of her laptop screen. And 6 weeks after she walked out of Whitmore Industries with a cardboard box, she filed official paperwork for her new firm. Summit Strategies LLC. It was not just a business. It was a mission. Her first phone call was to Eli Chong. The former IT director Bradley had fired 2 years earlier for cultural fit issues. Translation: Eli had been too bold, too innovative, and far too willing to question outdated traditions. For Bradley's liking. Eli, she said when he picked up, I am building something, and I need you. There was a pause. Then came his reply. I have been waiting for this call. Over the next 2 months, Vanessa assembled a team of people who had been cast aside by Whitmore Industries for one reason or another. Tanya Rivera, the brilliant marketing director who had dared to ask why women and people of color were consistently paid less than their white male counterparts. Victor Lee, former in-house legal counsel, let go after he raised concerns about compliance violations. Each of them carried their own scars, and each of them came with something more valuable: inside knowledge of how Bradley ran his empire. But perhaps the most important piece fell into place when Vanessa received a late-night text from an unknown number. If you want to know what Bradley has really been up to, call me. Lauren Price. Lauren had been Bradley's executive assistant for 3 years. Quiet, overlooked, invisible to him in the worst way, treated more like office furniture than a human being. But Lauren noticed everything. Every call, every deleted email, every whispered conversation behind closed doors. When Vanessa met her at a quiet diner on the Lower East Side, Lauren slid a USB drive across the table. 5 years of internal data, she said, including the emails he thinks no longer exist. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she took the drive. Why are you doing this? She asked. Lauren's voice stayed low. Because I am tired of watching him destroy people like you and like me. Back at her apartment, Eli spent days going through the files. What they found made Vanessa's stomach turn. Hundreds of emails containing racist jokes, sexist comments, and outright instructions to sabotage the careers of employees deemed too different. There were emails detailing how Bradley had manipulated government diversity reports to win federal contracts. Emails where he laughed with board members about how easy it was to take Vanessa's strategy and pass it off as his own. And most damning of all, documents proving that Bradley had systematically erased digital evidence of employee complaints, discrimination reports, and financial fraud. Eli recovered all of it. We have enough here to bury him, he said one night, scrolling through a particularly incriminating chain of messages. But Vanessa was not interested in burying him quickly. She wanted something more devastating, more public. Not yet, she replied, staring at the wall where she had pinned Bradley's face alongside screenshots of canceled contracts and financial forecasts. We are going to let him dig his own grave. I want him to think he is untouchable, right up until the moment the ground disappears from beneath him. The timing could not have been bettered as Bradley's stolen strategy began to run out of steam. Whitmore Industries started losing key clients. The very cracks Vanessa had predicted months ago were starting to show. Investor confidence wavered. Profits dipped for the first time in 2 quarters. And just as Vanessa had hoped, Bradley panicked. One afternoon, as she sat in her makeshift home office, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a new email notification. Subject line: discreet consulting request from the office of Bradley Whitmore. Lauren's inside connection had worked. Bradley was looking for external help to fix the crisis he had created, and the firm he was reaching out to was Summit Strategies. Vanessa let out a slow, satisfied breath. The trap is set, she whispered. Her team gathered in her living room that evening, going over the plan. Each of them knew their role. Each of them carried the weight of what had been taken from them. And in less than a week, they would deliver the presentation that Bradley Whitmore would never forget. Not for the rest of his life. That be why the time Bradley Whitmore sent that email asking for help. Whitmore Industries was already sinking fast. Profits that had once soared after stealing Vanessa's strategy were now falling every month. Major clients had quietly ended contracts. Investors were growing nervous. Inside the company, rumors of layoffs, missed targets, and canceled projects spread like wildfire. Bradley could feel the pressure closing in. For the first time in his career, the media started asking difficult questions. Business journalists, who once called him a genius, were now writing articles with headlines like, "Whitmore Industries in trouble. Leadership mistakes costing millions." Bradley needed help. Fast. But what he did not know was that the consulting firm he had reached out to was owned and led by the very woman he had humiliated, fired, and forgotten. Vanessa Grant. When Vanessa read his email, she could hardly believe it. Bradley wanted Summit Strategies to come in and optimize internal operations and help reverse recent client losses. It was almost too perfect. Sitting at her desk, Vanessa let out a quiet laugh. Eli, sitting across from her, raised an eyebrow. "Is this for real?" Vanessa nodded. "He has no idea it is me." The next 2 days felt electric. Her team gathered in their small downtown office, working late into the night, going over files, emails, financial reports, everything Lauren and Eli had collected over the past 6 months. "We need this presentation to do more than just offer solutions," Vanessa said, looking around at her team. "This is not just about fixing a company. This is about exposing the truth." Tanya pulled up internal HR emails showing discrimination complaints that had been buried. Victor prepared a legal summary of Bradley's fraudulent government contract filings. Eli compiled data showing exactly how much money the company had lost due to poor leadership decisions. And Lauren? She made sure that 3 well-known business journalists would be sitting at that boardroom table on the day of the presentation. "Bradley wants to impress the media," Lauren said with a grin. "Let's give him a show he will never forget." On the evening before the big day, Vanessa sat alone in her apartment, staring at the final draft of her presentation. Her laptop screen glowed with the first slide. The real cost of leadership, built on privilege and deception. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then she typed the opening line of her speech. "Good morning. I am here today not just to solve your problems, but to show you how they began." She leaned back and let out a slow breath. This was it. Months of planning. Sleepless nights. Silent anger turned into focused strategy. The next day would be the moment everything changed. Early the next morning, Vanessa dressed carefully, a sharp black suit. Minimal jewelry. Hair pulled back in a sleek style that meant business. As she looked in the mirror, she thought back to that day 6 months ago, packing her things into a cardboard box while Bradley smiled from behind his desk. Not today. Today? She was walking back into Whitmore Industries on her own terms. Downstairs, her team waited for her. Eli, Tanya, Victor, Lauren, all dressed in dark suits, faces calm, but eyes full of determination, eyeing the car ride over. There was a heavy but hopeful silence. Everyone knew what was coming by the time they arrived at the Whitmore Industries headquarters. Journalists were already gathering in the lobby, holding notepads and checking camera equipment. Bradley wanted the press there. He wanted headlines about how he was hiring diverse, cutting-edge consultants to turn the company around. He had no idea that the story he was about to create would be his downfall. Up on the 23rd floor, the boardroom had been arranged. With extra chairs for the media. 12 top executives sat at the long table, chatting nervously. 3 journalists waited with open notebooks. At exactly 3 p.m., the double doors opened. Vanessa stepped inside, briefcase in hand. Every face turned to her. Bradley, standing near the head of the table, smiled widely like a man eager to show off his latest bold decision. "Everyone," he said proudly, "I would like you to meet Vanessa Grant, CEO of Summit Strategies, a rising star in the consulting world. I had the pleasure of meeting her just yesterday at a coffee shop." The irony of that statement nearly made Vanessa laugh out loud, but she kept her face neutral. Calm. Professional. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," she said smoothly, connecting her laptop to the projector. "Today," she began, looking each person in the eye, "we will not only discuss solutions, we will examine how your problem started in the first place." Her first slide appeared on the screen. Bradley's smile began to fade. And Vanessa knew the real show was about to begin. The boardroom fell silent as Vanessa clicked to the first slide. A large title appeared across the screen in bold letters. The real cost of leadership built on privilege and deception. Bradley Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confident smile already starting to crack. Vanessa's voice stayed calm, controlled, surgical. For the past 6 months, she began. Summit Strategies has conducted a full analysis of Whitmore Industries, including financial trends, leadership decisions, client retention rates, and internal communication records. Some executives exchanged nervous glances. The journalist at the far end of the table leaned forward, pens ready. Vanessa clicked to the next slide. $52 million in lost contracts. Graphs appeared showing the company's sharp decline. This is the revenue your company has lost since implementing the strategy Mr. Whitmore presented as his own, she said. A strategy originally designed by a former director of strategy, who was fired under the excuse of cultural restructuring. The room grew colder. Bradley cleared his throat and forced a laugh. Well, you know, corporate changes are always tough. But that is why we brought you in, to help fix things. Vanessa turned to face him fully. Fix things? She repeated softly. Let us talk about that. She pressed AKEY audio. Recording began to play. Bradley's voice echoed through the room. Look, between us, we know our team does not have the same diversity as other companies. But that just means we have less drama and more focus on the job. Gasps filled the boardroom. Several executives turned pale. One of the journalists immediately started typing, while another flipped on their voice recorder to capture the moment live. Bradley shot up from his chair. That recording is taken out of context. Vanessa did not flinch. Then let us provide more context. She clicked again. The screen filled with screenshots of internal emails. Subject lines popped up one after another. Too much diversity affecting performance. Let us find a way to quietly remove her. Her strategy is brilliant, but we cannot let her take credit. Vanessa read each one aloud. Slowly, deliberately, the room felt like it was shrinking. Bradley's face flushed deep red, and beads of sweat gathered on his forehead. This is some kind of setup, he stammered. Victor Lee stood from his seat and pointed toward the screen. I recognize these emails. I was on many of those threads. Before you fired me, Bradley. Before Bradley could respond, Vanessa clicked again. Now, government contract documents appeared, side by side with internal emails showing how Bradley had falsified diversity reports to secure federal funding. This, Vanessa said, is clear evidence of government fraud. David Lopez, one of the company's legal advisors sitting at the back, dropped his pen. One of the journalists muttered under their breath. This is a career-ending scandal. Bradley backed toward the wall, shaking his head. You cannot do this. Not in front of the media, his voice cracked. Vanessa looked directly at him. You invited them, she said calmly. Remember? You wanted them here for your big leadership announcement. The journalists exchanged looks. Two of them had already started live streaming the meeting for their networks. If on cue, several executive cell phones began buzzing on the table. Incoming messages. Notifications. Tanya picked up her phone and looked at Vanessa. Major clients are canceling their contracts. Right now, during this meeting, she said softly. Bradley's hands shook as he reached for his own phone. Unread emails piled up on his screen. Subject: contract termination, effective immediately. Subject: suspension of payments pending investigation. Subject: legal action under review. Vanessa moved to the next slide. The final blow. A side-by-side comparison of her original strategic plan and the stolen version Bradley had presented to the board 6 months ago. The formatting, the wording, even the slide order, identical. This, Vanessa said, pointing to the screen, is the strategy that saved Whitmore Industries, the one you took credit for after firing me. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of that sentence fill the air. I was not just some disposable employee, Mr. Whitmore. I was the reason your company survived until now. Bradley looked as though the air had been knocked out of him. One executive stood up, clearly distancing himself. Another slipped out of the room quietly, already dialing his lawyer. Across the boardroom, the mood shifted from disbelief to survival mode. Executives who had once laughed at Vanessa, who had sat in this very room 6 months earlier applauding Bradley's leadership, now avoided eye contact with him entirely. Vanessa closed her laptop with a soft click. Our job here today, she said, was not to save Whitmore Industries. Her gaze swept the room. It was to show you in undeniable terms what happens when you build an empire on prejudice, theft, and arrogance. Bradley sank back into his chair, his face pale and drenched with sweat. For the first time in his life, he had no words. The journalists stood and began packing their equipment. One of them looked at Vanessa and said quietly, "This story will be on every front page by morning." Vanessa turned towards the door, and with her team following behind her, she left the boardroom without another glance at the man who had once believed she was beneath him. The sound of executives' phones ringing filled the hallway behind her. And just like that, the empire Bradley Whitmore had built collapsed live, on camera, for the entire world to see. 18 months later, the skyline of Manhattan stretched endlessly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vanessa Grant's new penthouse office. The sun reflected off the glass towers, casting a golden glow over the city she now ruled in ways she had once only dreamed of. Vanessa stood near the window, holding a copy of the latest issue of Forbes magazine in her hands. Her face graced the cover, framed by the headline in bold gold letters, "The $5 coffee that cost a corporate empire. How Vanessa Grant built a $200 million consulting giant." A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Lauren, smiling with the same quiet pride that had carried them through sleepless nights and impossible deadlines. "Your interview starts in 10 minutes, Lauren said. Vanessa nodded. "Thank you. Let them know I will be right there." The Forbes journalist was already setting up in the conference room, waiting to ask the question that had been on everyone's mind for months. How did Vanessa Grant bring down one of the most powerful CEOs on Wall Street and build something bigger in its place? But Vanessa already knew her answer. IT was never just about revenge. That IT was about proving what real leadership looked like. Across the city, in a small, dimly lit apartment in Queens, Bradley Whitmore sat hunched over a used laptop he had bought on eBay. The cracked screen flickered as he edited his LinkedIn profile for the 5th time that day. Once, Bradley's bio had listed titles like CEO, Visionary Leader, Forbes 100 Influencer. Now his headline read, "Seeking entry-level opportunities, willing to relocate, open to all industries." His inbox sat empty. Most of the big firms blacklisted him months ago. The federal investigation into his fraudulent government contracts had resulted in multi-million-dollar fines. His Connecticut mansion was long gone, sold at auction to cover debts. The yacht repossessed. The private investment accounts frozen. His wife had filed for divorce 8 months earlier, taking what little remained. His children, embarrassed by the public scandal, had legally changed their last names. Now, Bradley sat alone, applying for junior analyst positions at companies that, just 2 years ago, would have begged for his time. Humiliation had become his daily routine. The final blow had come when he walked into a coffee shop 2 weeks ago, only to see Vanessa's face staring back at him from the cover of Forbes on the magazine rack. Her name, her smile, her success. It was everywhere. The article title had burned into his mind. How one woman's humiliation became corporate America's most expensive mistake. Back at Summit Strategies headquarters, Vanessa finished her interview, answering each question with grace and quiet power. When the journalist finally asked the one question they had saved for last, "When did you decide you were going to bring Bradley Whitmore down?" Vanessa paused. Her team watched from the hallway, knowing exactly what was coming. "It was not when he fired me," Vanessa said slowly, meeting the journalist's gaze. "It was not even when I found out he had stolen my entire strategy." She smiled. "It was the day he paid for my coffee and looked at me like I was a charity case." The journalist blinked. "A $5 coffee." Vanessa's smile widened, full of irony and satisfaction. "Yes," she said, "because in that moment, I realized something very important. He did not see me as an equal, not even as a temporarily struggling professional. He saw me as someone naturally beneath him, someone he needed to rescue for the sake of his ego." She leaned back in her chair. "And that was the most expensive $5 he ever spent." The interview ended with handshakes and photographs. As Vanessa walked back to her office, Eli and Lauren were waiting with updates. "Vanessa," Eli said with a grin, holding up his phone, "you need to see this." On the screen was a video from LinkedIn, posted just hours earlier. Bradley Whitmore, wearing an ill-fitted suit, sitting against a blank wall, speaking nervously into a webcam. "Hi, I am Bradley Whitmore, looking for an opportunity to restart my career in an inclusive and diverse corporate environment." Vanessa burst into laughter, the kind of full, deep laughter she had not felt in years. Lauren shook her head in disbelief. Inclusive and diverse? Coming from him? That is rich. Eli scrolled down. Wait, it gets better. He actually applied for a job here at Summit Strategies. The entire room fell silent for a second, then the laughter started again. "What did Human Resources say?" Vanessa asked. Lauren handed her a printed copy of the reply. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, thank you for your interest in Summit Strategies. Unfortunately, your experience does not align with our company's core values of respect, integrity, and meritocracy. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Vanessa read the letter twice, then placed it gently in her desk drawer. As she stood by the window, watching the city she had conquered, Vanessa smiled to herself. Because at the end of the day, her greatest victory was not that she had destroyed Bradley Whitmore's career. It was that she had built something he could never touch, a legacy. A team, and a company where people like her, people once overlooked, humiliated, and underestimated, now thrived. Every single day, the sun was beginning to set over Manhattan, casting long golden beams through the glass walls of Summit Strategies headquarters. Vanessa sat at her desk, flipping through the day's final reports when Lauren entered, holding a slim envelope with the Summit HR logo on it. "He actually applied," Lauren said, trying to hide her smirk. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Bradley?" Lauren nodded. "For a junior consultant role, of all things." Vanessa set the report aside and opened the envelope. Inside was the formal rejection letter that had gone out to Bradley Whitmore that morning. The language was cold, corporate, and undeniably perfect. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, thank you for your interest in Summit Strategies. After careful review, we regret to inform you that your experience and leadership history do not align with our company's core values of respect, integrity, and meritocracy. We wish you the best in your future professional endeavors. Sincerely, Human Resources Department." Vanessa let out a soft laugh as she read the final line again. For years, Bradley Whitmore had hidden behind words like cultural fit and tradition to shut doors in people's faces. Now, those same doors had closed on him, and she had not even needed to lift a finger. Her phone buzzed. It was Eli, texting from the cafe down the street. "Coffee break? Your usual table is free." Vanessa grabbed her purse, tucked the letter into her desk drawer like a final trophy, and headed out. The small coffee shop on the corner looked just as it had that morning so many months ago. The morning when everything had started with one condescending gesture. The same barista stood behind the counter. This time, when he saw her walk in, his face lit up with recognition. "Good evening, Ms. Grant," he said with a respectful smile. "Your usual latte with an extra shot?" Vanessa smiled. "Yes, please." When it was time to pay, she pulled out her new card, a sleek, black, no-limit corporate card with her name embossed in gold letters. Vanessa Grant, CEO, Summit Strategies. The card cleared instantly. "Approved," the cashier said proudly. Vanessa picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and looked around the shop. There were no more impatient cashiers asking her to swipe another card, and no arrogant executives standing behind her, pretending to offer charity while dripping with condescension. There was just her, standing taller than she ever had on her own terms. In her own powered AS, she stepped outside and glanced up at the skyline she now called her own. Vanessa smiled softly, because the real revenge was never about destroying him. It was about rising so high that he could never reach her again.